안녕하세요. 저는 멕시코에서 온 크리스티안부르고스입니다. 한국에 산 지 6년 됐습니다.
안녕하세요. 태국에서 왔고 이번 K-랭귀지스쿨에서 실현된 파나사라고 합니다.
안녕하세요 여러분, 저 프랑스에서 온 조던이라고 합니다. 네, 제가 한국에서 4년 정도 살았고 제가 배우로 활동하고 있습니다.
K랭귀지스쿨 시청자 여러분, 안녕하세요.
여러분이 처음 한국을 알고 싶어 했을 때 한국을 가보고 싶다고 생각하면서
한국말 첫 걸음 시작했을 때 정말 가슴이 설레었죠. 항, Paris qui finit par ing, 초성 nous avons hier.
ต้องช่วยกันจำนะคะคือการเขียนจากทางซ้ายไปขวา
안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
Korean is a small country, but it's an amazing country. It has a lot of interesting stuff. If you guys love K-culture and K-pop, dramas and everything like that, learning Korean would be a good point to you to understand everything, to understand the culture as well. If you can speak Korean, that would make you really unique, I guess. I would be happy to teach it to you.
I learn language, so I create a new whole life that I will never expect that was going to happen to me. For all the people, all the Mexican people, and all the people in Latin America that speak Spanish and wants to open a new world in front of their eyes, I think language is the answer, and I think that's why you should learn Korean or any language you want.
I think learning language, promotes world peace because we not only learn language, but we also learn the other country's culture as well. When you learn a new language, no matter where you go, you are at home. So that is really my favorite word of all. Yeah. In the future, I would like to be a university professor in Korean language and literature. That's why, I've been living here for 6 years, and I, would like to use my experience, my knowledge to share to Thai students.
When I first learned Korean, I learned it from a Korean teacher, of course, but I would have actually enjoyed if French would have explained it to me. I mean, in which way to think in French to understand this or that grammar rule or anything like that.
Yeah, I remember when I was studying Korean in Mexico, there was no such thing. I would love to see something like that and someone explaining that to me in Spanish in a way I can understand and relate to it directly. So I thought it was a really meaningful thing to do, so I started doing this project. 한글 창제에 관한 역사 이야기를 배워보도록 하겠습니다.
Well, we're actually responsible for the main part that we're talking about Korean consonants and vowels. We all do that. And then, not only the language, but we also introduce a history of Hunmin Jeongeum, which is the first, document describing Korean characters, but also the history of how King Sejong came to invent the characters too. And I think we all speak in Korean language first, and then we explain to the audience in our own language afterwards. And not only the language, but we also, add some short story, a fun story about Korean history to the lesson too. I think everyone can easily fall in love with Korean characters because they're simple, logical, and easy, but no, there's not easy.
Yeah, not easy.
And you probably heard it 1,000 times already. Anyone can learn Korean characters in 1 hour or 2 hours. And which is completely different from Thailand. We actually have a very complex and complicated writing system, which can take you 1 or 2 months in order to memorize and to read everything. So I think the simplicity of Korean characters is the main reason why Korean is so attractive and so popular.
The Spanish language, in our cases, yes, we do speak Spanish, but we got them from the Spanish people that conquer us for over 300 years. So it's not quite ours. We used to have our own language before, which was the Aztec or the Mayans. They used their own language, then we lost everything. The Koreans, even though they got conquered by the Japanese people, they managed to keep the language. So I just found that to be an amazing thing that I would love to have that in my own country, but I don't have it. So I just kind of get that satisfaction from the Korean, and I appreciate that a lot.
And also, it's really logical, I think, like when you look at the characters, like the way like the syllables are made through the, for example, kiok and a, when you start to understand how to read it from left to right or left to right and up to down, everything like makes sense, and it's way easier than learn than the Chinese characters or kanji or Japanese or anything like that.
I think the hardest part when learning Korean was to understand the way Korean people express themselves, because there's some expressions that we don't have in our country, but Koreans have. And it's on the language. It's not about gathering words and making a new expression. It's an expression itself. For instance, when you say, 난 5,000원 있어. You can express that in so many different ways. 난 5,000원 있거든. 난 5,000원 있잖아. 난 5,000원 있지롱. But if you translate that to English, it's the same thing. I have 5,000 won. And there's no way you can twist that around with just that sentence in English to make it sound like it's supposed to sound when you talk about that in Korean. So understanding those kind of expression, I think that was the hardest thing. And making an own version of that in Spanish for me to understand it. That took me a lot of time, yeah.
When you speak Korean, the order of the words in the sentence is different, right? So in English, you would say, I read a book under the tree. In Korean, you would say, I book, tree under book read, right? So the time your brain starts to understand how to think like that, because to be fluent at Korean, you need to think in Korean.
How do you call these things that express sound? 위성어, retail, kind of that stuff. So usually we don't express that with words, but Korean does. 깡충 깡충 뛴다. You will never say 깡충 깡충 in any other language but Korean.
구독.
Yes, 구독, 절레. All those words, I think they became my favorites. Every time I hear a double word, I just go crazy because it's so cute. It's so funny. Yeah.
Bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Lambertoni, je suis français. Ça fait environ 4 ans maintenant que je vis en Corée du Sud, je suis acteur. Et j'espère que vous pourrez apprendre le coréen de par K-랭귀지스쿨 dans le but de pouvoir venir en Corée un jour et faire ce que vous avez envie de faire ici.
Chicos y chicas, el idioma es una parte muy importante de nuestras vidas, así que pónganse las pilas y aprendan coreano porque en Language School tenemos todo preparado para que ustedes puedan aprender facilito.
สวัสดีคุณผู้ชมทุกท่านนะคะดิฉันนางสาวพรรณษามาจากประเทศไทยนะคะก็รู้สึกยินดีแล้วก็ดีใจเป็นเกียรติมากๆที่ได้มีโอกาสมาสอนภาษาเกาหลีให้กับทุกท่านนะคะในรายการ K-랭귀지스쿨นะคะก็ปัจจุบันนี้ความสัมพันธ์ระหว่างไทยกับเกาหลีเนี่ยถือว่าแน่นแฟ้นมากนะคะก็เลยอยากจะให้ทุกคนนะคะได้มาทำความรู้จักกับภาษาและวัฒนธรรมอีกนะคะมากๆด้วยกันเลยนะคะในรายการ K-랭귀지스쿨ครั้งนี้ค่ะแล้วเจอกันค่ะสวัสดีค่ะ K-랭귀지스쿨에서
한국말을
재밌게
배우세요.